Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Affinity Live 2019. I've got to thank you so much for coming tonight. It's great to see so many of you here. You know what? Because this is actually a really important night for us. It's actually something that it feels like we've been working towards really for a very long time now. And I think because of that, I just kind of wanted to take an opportunity, and especially as we're live today, to say publicly really just how proud I am to work for such an incredible team. I really kind of feel like with our Affinity apps, we're kind of changing the face of what creativity software can be all about. And of course, that ranges from lots of things. We've already implemented lots of new innovations that people have never seen before. From simple things like savable undo history to really important things like shared file format, and even things like, end-to-end 32-bit workflows and all sorts of stuff that we've implemented so far. And of course, I think, 2 years ago, we brought something really new to the market which no one had ever seen before, and of course that was Affinity Photo on iPad, which is the first time that a fully fledged professional photo editing tool has ever made its way onto iPad. I should say first time and still the only time that a professional photo editing tool's made its way onto iPad that can work across the same file on Windows and Mac, of course. And of course, last year at Affinity Live, we did exactly the same thing with Affinity Designer, the first time that a pro graphic design app has made its way onto iPad. And we're a small company here, right? Working out of this unit in Wilford Industrial Estate. And as I say, it just makes me so proud of everything that we've achieved. And frankly, it's only possible because of the hard work, the dedication, the effort, and really the quality, I think, of all of the Affinity team here. So I just kind of wanted to start by allowing you to give yourselves a round of applause. Now, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, we kind of raised the bar even more with the launch of 1.7, the 1.7 versions of Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer. And of course, that had lots of great new features in it. It had things like a whole new sub-brush mechanism to create really fluid brushes, a whole new layers panel where you can change your thumbnail size, you can go for a checkable background, you can now tag with colors. We've added a new symmetry mode. Of course, we've now added an appearance panel to add multiple lines and strokes and fills to shapes. A whole new isometric mode where you can actually draw live on isometric planes. And of course, perhaps the biggest thing that we added, and it's been a long time coming, is arrowheads, ladies and gentlemen. It's a special shout out to Matt, that one. But of course, actually, 1.7 was about a lot more than just new features. It was actually very much about the core technology that our apps are built on. And of course, one of those things is that we've now introduced full HDR and EDR monitor support. The first graphic design and photo editing tool to be able to do this, including, of course, support for Apple's Pro Display XDR. Now, I would like to demo this to you tonight, but unfortunately, we're not streaming in HDR, so anyone who's watching it wouldn't even be able to see what we're doing. But there is a 1000 nit, I think, display in the demo area, and I'd urge you to check it out because it's pretty stunning. And of course, the other thing that we did was add metal compute acceleration to Affinity Photo. And this is, I think, one of the really big deal things that we've done. I mean, actually, we were really proud that Apple's keynote, actually, I think this was State of the Union 2 weeks ago at their WWDC event, that they actually used Affinity Photo to show the benchmarks of the performance gains that we've had. And you can even see from this that it's kind of pretty ridiculous, 12 times faster on a MacBook Pro. I mean, the great thing as well with what we've done with Metal Compute and GPU acceleration generally is that our app scales in a linear fashion with the amount of GPUs you've got installed, and that's why there's some absolutely crazy figures here with a new Mac Pro with 4 GPUs installed. So yeah, that's another big improvement. Now, luckily enough, that's actually something that I can demonstrate to you. And I thought the best way to do that was to take an image. I've got an image of a car, surprise, surprise, and we actually resampled this up to be 100 megapixels. It's 12,500 pixels by 8,000 pixels high. And I'm going to show you, how fast Affinity Photo now is with metal compute on an image this big. So I just need to swap over to my Mac, hopefully. There it is, good. So this is, obviously I'm on a MacBook Pro. This does have a Vega GPU in it, so it is pretty beefed up. Hopefully you can see from the top left-hand side, it is genuinely a 100 megapixel image. So this is the sort of thing that a lot of software would previously really struggle with. So in this case, I'm just going to do something relatively straightforward. I want to add a radial blur to this wheel. And if I go to my filter effects and add a radial blur, I'm just going to ramp that up, and hopefully you can see just how fast, this is pushing 100 million pixels around, and this is the sort of speed you can achieve with metal compute. And I'll just put that in the center of the wheel. Now, of course, the great thing generally with a lot of the filter effects, and in fact, radial blur was a new one that we added for 1.7, is that we add our filter effects as non-destructive filter layers. And this is fantastic, really, because it means it is non-destructive. I can turn this off, and I can turn it back on again. I can even do things like mask it and erase from it. So here I'm going to pick up an eraser. And in fact, immediately, you can see here, I get a live nozzle preview of what I'm about to erase. So now I can actually go and erase some of that blur away, because obviously I don't want it on anything else other than the wheel. And I can do it like that. And of course, at any point, I can still go back into that blur and change the amount of blur that's on it. And of course, you can actually combine this with all sorts of stuff that you might do for a composition. Like I might now add a HSL layer, adjustment layer, change the color of the car. In fact, again, if I was to wave that about, you can see how fast it is. And in fact, I've got a bunch of other layers here. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but I'll just show you a couple of other things. If I had some dust, even things like blend mode, still preview live when you scrub through them. So you can see exactly what you're going to get before you do it. I could add some more particles on here, and in this case, I could add a motion blur. And again, the motion blur is incredibly fast and live, and that's still a non-destructive filter layer. And in fact, I could carry on here and start building up this whole composition like that. The palm tree is very important to this. But even though you kind of build up this whole composition, it's still keeping that non-destructive workflow. So I could go back to example and pick up that motion blur, and I can still edit it even after I've done everything else. So the great thing with GPU compute, I think, is, one thing for sure is about dealing with massive images and deep color images as well in a really fast way. But it also allows people to work in a different way, because you can actually keep a much more non-destructive workflow, much deeper into everything that you do. So it is a very important piece of technology, I think. So that's metal compute. And I feel very fortunate, I think, really, that it feels like our customers are really liking kind of what we're doing. And hopefully are enjoying the sort of the double-headed approach that we've got, in the sense that we are, for sure, adding lots of new features and functionality that our customers are asking for, but also making sure we keep an eye on that core technology that's the foundation of our apps. And in fact, last year at Affinity Live, we spoke about how fast we'd grown, how well our apps were becoming adopted. And this was on the basis of, we'd been around, I think, been 4 years since our first app launch at that point. And I announced last year that we just reached 1 million users worldwide. So that was only 12 months ago. But I'm thrilled to be able to tell you tonight that we're now up to 2 million Affinity users. But what's even more staggering about that is that we managed to achieve that with only 2 apps. So I think it's about time we made that 3.
tomorrow. If you don't love me now, you gon' love me tomorrow. Get it.
You're gonna love me, you're gonna love me, you're gonna love me. You're gonna love me, you're gonna love me, you're gonna love me. You're gonna love me, you're gonna love me, you're gonna love me. Super, 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 super cool.
Pretty cool, huh? So yeah, I just can't even begin to explain just how thrilled I am to be able to say that Affinity Publisher is now available. It's available direct from us, it's available in the Microsoft Store, it's available in the Mac App Store. We've gone on 9 languages simultaneously across all these channels today. Literally, I think our site went live about a minute ago, so we were right in sync. And it just feels fantastic to have done that. And of course, the other great thing, which I don't really need to tell you guys, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that, of course, Affinity Publisher does not require subscription. You know, Affinity Publisher really has been a labour of love for us. We've been working on it probably for 3 years now, pretty solidly. And it's again taken a huge amount of effort and passion. And in particular today, I just want to thank Adam and his development team for all the work that he's done on Affinity Publisher. But the other thing I've got to mention as well is that actually we had 200,000 beta testers help us with this. We started the beta test, the beta sign-up about 9 months ago, and actually all of our beta testers have really made a massive contribution to just how well we've managed to polish up Affinity Publisher. So I'd also like to thank all of our beta testers. Of course, some of you are here tonight, so I'd like to say a big thanks to all of our beta testers too. You know, I think everyone was pretty much aware that today we were launching Publisher. And so there's actually something else that I kind of wanted to talk about. It was about 10 years ago now when a group of our developers, Tony, Matt, Sandy, they kind of come to us with a vision. And it was the vision of what Affinity was going to be. And of course, a lot of that included some of the stuff that we've spoken about today, like taking advantage of the latest technology, beyond multiple operating systems across different devices. But actually that vision was a lot bigger than that, actually. That the whole concept of what they were talking about was much more about what a creative workflow could be like. You know, with a creative suite of apps, I think, you know, nearly all designers use a desktop publishing app, a photo editing app, and a vector drawing app, you know. That's kind of what they do. But the workflow working with those things is actually really, really painful. You know, especially in the context of working on a layout, for example. You know, you've always got images and graphics in your layout. If you ever want to edit an image, you have to go back to your photo editing tool. You then need to re-export, re-import it in. And obviously the same thing with graphics too. And it's strange because I just think that, you know, that's the way that everyone's kind of accepted it is. And they kind of believe there isn't, you know, another way to achieve that. Well, you know, actually, there is. You know, imagine if you could have your suite of creative apps and you could, in some way, link them together. You know, imagine if, you know, you could access all your tools, all your core tools and functionality for the whole suite of apps within a single workflow. Well, I am delighted to be able to announce today StudioLink. Now, the best way, I think, for me to show you how StudioLink works is obviously to show you. So I'm just going to open my Mac here. And here I'm in Affinity Publisher. and we've got this like layout that we're working on. Now, there's three little buttons at the top of the app. You know, we've actually had these disabled during the beta, and there's been lots of speculation about what they really do. But actually what they do is that if you own Affinity Designer, you get an instant link to all of those tools. And if you own Affinity Photo, exactly the same. You get an instant link to all of those tools. And when I say instant, I mean utterly instant. So here, I'm on my publisher persona. So of course, down the left-hand side, I've got all my publishing style tools, picture frames, tables, that sort of stuff. And down the right, I've got things like advanced typography options or whatever. But now if I want to use some vector tools, I can just hit this button. And I'm now actually in Affinity Designer. You probably didn't notice because you're literally instantly in it. Down the left-hand side now, I've got all of my advanced vector design tools. On the right-hand side, I've got things like panels for symbols and for isometric planes and layers and vector brushes and that type of thing. And then if I hit this button here, the interface is now instantly transformed into Affinity Photo. So I'm going to try to demonstrate just a few little examples about why this is such a revolutionary thing in terms of workflow. Actually, for this, I'm just going to get rid of my Pages panel. Sorry, let me go back up to the spread I was on. So let's start here. I've got this image of this guy, and I'm working on this layout, but actually what I want to do is cut him out. So ordinarily, I'd have to go into my photo editing tool and do a selection and that type of stuff, right? So now I can just go to my photo persona. I've not changed my layout at all. Now I've got all of my pixel selection tools down the right-hand side. So I can choose my selection brush, and I can just do a quick selection of him. And of course, we already know that Affinity Photo has a fantastic selection refinement algorithm. So I can just do that. I could stick that out as a mask and apply it, and he's cut out. Of course, if I zoom in, you can see just what a great job we do of selection refinement. But let me zoom out again. But of course, once I've done that, now I can instantly go back into my publisher persona, because what I want to do now is edit the wrap settings of this. So I can go straight into my text wrap, set it to tight. I can mess about with the padding of that wrap to actually wrap my text around it. It's probably a good opportunity at this point to just say how insane the performance of Publisher is. I mean, if you look at that, how I move this image around, all the text instantly flows around it, which is fantastic. Let's look at another quick example. Here I've got some images on a layout, and we sort of zoom in a little bit here. On this particular one, I've got it cropped kind of how I want it, but, this boat down here is annoying me because it's just sort of over the edge of the crop, and I don't want to change the crop, and obviously I don't want to have to go back to a photo editing tool to get rid of it. So again, here I can go to my photo persona in layers. If I just select that, I can just add a pixel layer on there, and with my in-painting brush, I can just paint over that boat, and it just instantly vanishes. So it gets it out of the image. So again, it just saves that round trip entirely. Let's not leave Designer out, eh? So I'm going to go down here to this layout. One thing that you might often do in any kind of layout is have like repeated icons and symbols or things across your document that you kind of want to link together in some way. Now, normally a desktop publishing app doesn't have that kind of functionality, but obviously Affinity Designer does. So let's say I wanted to use this symbol in multiple places on my document. I can just flick to my designer persona. I can create a symbol out of that now, and I'll just make a few copies here just so we can see it. I mean, obviously, these could be anywhere across your whole document. And then once you've done that, they are now linked symbols. So if I edit one of them, it edits all the others. So I can say change the color of it and that type of thing. I mean, of course, Affinity Publisher has master pages for like page objects and things, but this is a different thing, right? Actually having like repeated symbols across your document. I mean, another nice thing actually is that, as I think I mentioned earlier, we've just added an isometric feature in Affinity Designer. But actually, if you think about it, that's a great feature for layouts as well. So I'm still in my designer persona. I can select, say, these cards. And if I want to put them on an isometric plane, I can just go to my isometric panel, I'll just set up an isometric grid here, and then I can immediately just fit it to the top plane. And in fact, you can still edit in this plane. So I could add some more text, for example, and I'm actually working live on an isometric plane. There's just a couple of other examples I want to talk through. If I go down to this spread here. Now, at the moment, I've kind of created this layout, and I'm actually not entirely satisfied with the fact that this text is over the image. It's not making the text actually very clear at all. So what I actually want to do is put a blur on that image to make the text clearer. So again, if I go back to the photo persona and select the image, I'm going to now add, could be anything, I'll add a box blur this time to make the image more blurry. Let's preserve alpha. Right. And actually, there's an important point I want to make here. I've just added that box blur filter effect. And of course, again, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about GPU, that is a non-destructive filter. And of course, when you're working on a sort of a layout, a desktop publishing sort of layout, ordinarily, it's very important that you're using linked images. Otherwise, if you've got like a 200-page document, your file size just becomes massive. So the thing that's really important here is that's a non-destructive adjustment, and I've not lost any integrity of the link that I might have had on the image, if that makes sense. But of course, also, it means that I can sort of manipulate that live filter layer. So I've applied that over that whole image, but actually I just want it underneath the area of where the text is. So now, I might just go back to the designer persona. I'm going to draw a box around the area that I want to have the blur in. And because this is a non-destructive filter layer, I can actually, just with a drop zone, use that rectangle to clip the blur. So now that blur is actually clipped within that rectangle. If I go back to my box blur, I can still, let me zoom in a little bit here, I can still blur it, but now it's just under the area that I want it to be. And actually, if you think about it, this is actually a really good example of why this sort of workflow just works, right? Because ordinarily, if you had a layout like this and you wanted to create a blur around there, you'd have to bring this whole image out into your photo editing tool. You'd then have to kind of work out where your text is before you apply the blur. And then when you bring it back in, you might have got it in the wrong place. But let's say you got it in the right place. And then you decided you want to change your layout. So in this case, I might say, right, I want to, I'll go back to publisher persona because I want to add an extra column on that. And in fact, I want my text frame to be like that. At that point, I'll then have to go back to my photo editing tool to then redo where the blur is. But of course, now I can just go back to my layers panel, select that rectangle that's clipping the blur, and then I can move it to be under the text. So it's a massive, massive time saver that no one's ever really had the opportunity to do before. I think there's one final example I'll just come down and show you. So here, what I want to do is actually paint something on this background. And this is another just generally cool thing. You're working on a layout, but now you can actually just go to a photo persona and you can paint with a raster brush. So if I go back to my layers here, I'll just make sure I've got, I'll add a new pixel layer. And I'm going to go to my brushes and I'll select, say, that one. I'll just color pick something off there. So now I can literally just paint on there, these kind of little bubbly effects. And also I've got these kind of smoke brushes here. I'm going to choose one of those and I'll just show you again, it's got live nozzle preview. We've also added on-the-fly nozzle rotation, which is kind of cool. So I can add some smoke, for example, up there. But again, thank you. But, think about this, because I've not had to worry about DPI, I've not had to worry about what color space I'm in, because I'm already working in the document that this is intended for. So, as well as the fact, of course, I'm managing to paint these things and create these things in context of what other elements on my layout is. And actually, the other kind of cool thing here is if I go back into Publisher Persona, and I'll just zoom in a little bit. At the moment, sorry, I'll come out, because at the moment, I'm viewing this document in preview mode. Now in Publisher, just with a shortcut, I can flick to construction mode. So this is where you see your text flow and your margins and your bleed. And it's the bleed that's the important thing, because I've just painted that without even thinking about bleed. And if you see, if I zoom in and go without bleed and with, all of those brushes and everything that I've done has actually gone to my bleed, so I know it's going to be done correctly when I come to print it. So that is what we really envisioned from the start as this most incredible, fluid, creative workflow. And I'm so pleased, after all of these years, to finally be able to reveal that. And I'm also really, really pleased to be able to finally say that this is why we're called Affinity. It's cool, isn't it? So I've just got maybe one other thing to talk about. Let me just take a drink. So the first thing is that, of course, Affinity Publisher is available for Mac and Windows. Right, so it's desktop only right now. Many of you are going to be asking straight away, okay, when's the iPad version coming? So I'm really pleased to announce that we are working on the iPad version actively now. I should hope it's going to be something that will be out next year. And of course, it will have StudioLink technology built in as well. So that is going to be really special, of course, on iPad. But why not? But I guess the other thing to say is that, we've got, as I mentioned earlier, well, probably mentioned a few times, we've got a shared file format. People look at it, sometimes people don't realize this, because you look at our extensions, it's AF Designer, AF Photo, AF Pub. I mean, actually, they're exactly the same. There's no difference whatsoever. The only reason we actually call them these names is that so if you double click on them in your, in Finder or something, the operating system knows which app to open them in. That's the only reason we call them anything different, but they are actually identical. So then we were kind of thinking, well, that being the case, we're already in a situation where our iPad apps can open Publisher documents. Other than the fact that there's one sort of problem. So I'm just going to get my iPad up here. Let me just hopefully switch to AirPlay. Good. So while Affinity Designer does, and Affinity Photo does understand a Publisher document, one of the main things it doesn't understand is the concept of having multiple pages. So the main thing that we're working on is to be able to make a new page navigator to be available in our iPad apps, in Affinity Designer and Affinity Photo. And of course, here I've just loaded that same document that we've just been looking at, and I can now open it with this new page navigator and flick through the pages that's on it. And I can do that on iPad. I've also got to tell you that the performance on iPad is crazy. That thing that I showed you earlier, we're sort of moving this thing around. We get exactly the same kind of performance even on iPad. So this is incredible. So we are going, actually, you know what? I told a little lie there. I said that we were planning on doing that. In fact, we've already planned it. We've already submitted it. And the updates to Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer on iPad to accept Publisher files have actually just gone live now. So there you have it. That's it. That's Affinity Live 2019. Again, thanks so much for coming, everyone. I know that some of you have traveled a very long way. I'd also like to encourage you, of course, to go and check out the demo area. You've got the HDR display there. You've obviously got Publisher with the StudioLink. You've also, of course, got Designer with Publisher files. And we've also got a little preview of Affinity Designer running on Sidecar as well, which is pretty cool to check out. So definitely go and do that. But I suppose the final thing that I just want to say is that, I spoke a lot today about the fact that this is a, culmination of our vision that we've had, over the last 10 years to finally get to the point where we can reveal StudioLink. But the main thing that I want to say to you is that for us, by no means is this the end. In fact, we're just getting started. Thank you.